is Stephanie Cowherd. Cowherd? Herd of cows, okay, sorry. Stephanie is a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe. She joined the Forest and Ecosystem Services team at EcoTrust in 2018 and is a project manager for a collaborative tribal forestry workforce development project between ATNI, USET, ITC, Heritage University at Yakima, and EcoTrust. Stephanie is a graduate student at Oregon State University in the Master of Forestry Sustainable Forest Management Program and a recipient of ITC's Research Scholarship for Emery Oak Research with her tribe. Stephanie?
Hi, everyone. I didn't know I was getting introduced, so that was cool. But I want to thank you all for attending our panel discussion. I feel incredibly honored to share the stage with these exceptional panelists and represent my tribe and my work at this year's ITC's annual symposium. The framework for our panel today will start off with an overview of workforce development to frame our conversation. Then we will have that panel discussion with our panelists here. And following the panel discussion, we'll have an open Q&A session. So if you got any questions that come to mind while you're hearing our panelists talk, please write them down and save them for after our discussion. Following the Q&A discussion, if time allows, we'll have a closing summary to highlight some of the main points and themes that come out of our discussion today. So this panel will explore some of the complex issues and facets around workforce development, including youth opportunities, higher education, technician training, and professional development. The legacy of federal oversight, control over indigenous resource management programs, critical infrastructure needs in community areas on reservations, and the aging of the current generation of the natural resource workforce highlights the need and opportunities for training and engaging the next generation of natural resource stewards. ITC's Workforce Development Initiative envisions future generations of natural resource stewards grounded in culture and tradition to protect tribal lands and waters and guided by innovative programs, inclusive leadership, advancing technology supported by ITC and its partners. Their strategic plan builds on the report published by the Indian Forest Management Assessment Team, and these programs have uncovered some startling statistics about our natural resource workforce. Okay, there we go. So some of these statistics are that approximately 51% of BIA tribal forestry and fire employees are 50 years old and older. 23% are in their 40s, about 24% are in their 30s, and only 1.5% are under 30 years old. Staffing levels have declined 13% between 1991 and 2013. Reduced funding caused a staff decline of 36% in fire programming over a 10-year period. And Indian forest programs need a 65% increase in staff. However, the report does find an increase in number of Native American forestry professionals and an overall increase in the percentage of workforce professionals who are tribal members for 2 decades in a row. Native American enrollment at large colleges and universities has increased 19% across natural resource fields between 2004 and 2011. And tribal college natural resource programs also saw an increase in enrollment as well. Still, this does not negate the challenges that our field faces. There is a need for a vibrant, cohesive outreach, recruitment, and retention strategies, economic opportunity and upward mobility within tribal natural resource programs, competitive job opportunities for youth that support a tribal lifestyle, development of workforce leadership skills, access to natural resource management, education and technology, and cultural approaches to natural resource management and investment in our youth engagement. The panelists that you will interact with today draw on their diverse backgrounds and experiences to share how they creatively address these challenges to prepare a skilled, diverse, and competitive workforce to meet the needs of tribes and their federal partners. Your panelists are Dr. James Allen, Dr. Sarah Hoagland, Cody Desautel, and Kelly Hetzler. Dr. James Allen is a professor and the executive director, sorry, not yet, we'll back that up. Dr. James Allen is a professor and the executive director of the School of Forestry at Northern Arizona University. Prior to his arrival at NAU in 2006, he served for 6 years as the dean of the Forestry Division at Paul Smith College. He also worked for almost 10 years as a research ecologist and forester for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Louisiana, and for 4 years as a research ecologist forester for the U.S. Forest Service in Hawaii, in both cases specializing in the ecology, management, and restoration of forested wetlands. Dr. Sarah Hoagland is a member of the Pueblo of Laguna in New Mexico. She serves as the co-chair of the ITC Research Subcommittee and works with the USDA Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station as the liaison officer biologist to the Salish Kootenai College in Pueblo, Montana. Sarah received her PhD in forestry from Northern Arizona University in 2016. It's also her birthday today. I didn't start that. I just Sarah. Yay. As you gotta click it. Okay, back to our bios here. Thanks everybody, that was sweet and it made me feel like really welcome here too. Cody Desautel has served as the Natural Resource Director for the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation since April of 2014. Prior to that, he worked for the tribe as a forest engineer, forester, and fuels planner, and for the BIA as a natural resource officer, soil conservationist, and inventory forester. Cody has a bachelor's degree in environmental science from Haskell. And Kelly Hetzler is currently the inventory and planning forester for the BIA's Northwest Regional Office in Portland and has been there since 2016. Prior to this, she worked for the San Carlos Apache Tribe Forest Resources Program for 17 years. Great, and so with that, now we're gonna advance the slide. Our first question is for Dr. Allen. So what are the trends in forestry higher education? And what is NAU SOF doing to recruit and retain Native students?
First of all, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Adrian Layton, for organizing and coordinating this session and inviting me to partake. I really appreciate the opportunity. Before I jump into answering these questions, I was interested in the questions that Jim Shortemeyer asked towards the end of the last session. He asked how many of you were involved in prescribed fire, and then how many of you have a responsibility or should have responsibility, should engage with that. And I think that should be one of the take-home points of this session as well. Very few of us are directly involved in workforce development, especially the educational, higher educational part of it. But it's a responsibility of all of us. Every one of us in this room should be involved in one way or another in workforce development. And hopefully that'll come out in a number of the talks that the panelists will give. So let me try to answer the two questions that were given to me. What are the trends in forestry higher education? And what is NAU School of Forestry doing to recruit and retain Native students? So for the first question, enrollment trends, I'm going to show you three slides, three data type slides. They're a little bit dated. They go up to like 2010. And I want to give Terry Sherrick credit for developing all three of these. I think some of you in this room must know Terry. He was formerly the dean at Michigan Tech and also had worked at Utah State and Virginia Tech. Let me direct you to the top three lines. So the very top line, that blue line, is forestry. And that is the enrollment from 1980 to 2010 in thousands. And so if any of you are like me, you're at the peak of the baby boom. around late 70s, early 80s was around the peak of forestry enrollment as well. There were something like 7,000 forestry students at that time, partly because of the employment prospects. There was a big crash or lack of employment prospects. There was that big crash that you see in the 80s, a little bit of a recovery in the 90s, another drop in the early 2000s. And the trend since then has been relatively stable, maybe very slow growth overall nationally in forest enrollment. The other two lines that you see on the top, there's one that's kind of a light blue and says NR, natural resources, and environmental science enrollment. That has taken off and has exceeded forestry enrollment nationwide. And the same with wildlife. Wildlife and fisheries has begun to exceed forestry enrollment. So that's one of the key trends. There's been a lot of ups and downs with forestry, but in recent years, more students are enrolling in related fields like environmental science, wildlife, things like that. Some of the other majors you see there, like soils, watershed, those things have remained relatively stable at small numbers. This figure here shows raw numbers of students enrolled by university in all of these programs, natural resources, environment, but only in the colleges or departments that are members of NAFRA, the National Association of University Forest Resource Programs. So some of these universities have a lot more environmental science students and things like that than show up here. There's only one thing I really want to show you here, and you probably can't see very much detail, but you can hopefully differentiate the green and the red. The green are non-Hispanic white enrollment in these programs, and the red are all other minorities, all minorities. And one thing that should jump out at you is you don't see a whole lot of red. So there's not a lot of diversity in these programs. It is increasing slightly, but not that dramatically, and that's the main point I wanted to make with this figure. Certain universities are doing better than others, like Berkeley and Humboldt, and if you could see the proportion to NAU, it's actually not too bad either, but enrollment overall is small. And then the final figure I wanted to show you was this one, because I find this encouraging in the context of this meeting, and that is the percent of typical college-age people of various groups that are enrolled in natural resource programs. So the percentages are very tiny. It's less than 1% of all these groups. But what you see is the black line at the top is white enrollment as a percent of all white students 18 to 24. But the next line is Native Americans. So Native Americans enroll in these kind of programs at a higher proportion than other minority groups. And there's a slight increasing trend, which is really, I think, encouraging. So I think there is progress being made. So let me switch gears and talk about NAU. And I want to talk about what we're doing in a broader context of how it might be relevant to other universities, other colleges, and also to you all, wherever you may be working. I just put this slide in to give you a little context. The red circle shows Flagstaff, where NAU is. And you can see that we're located in an area with a lot of reservations, a lot of tribes, a lot of very high Native American population, probably the highest in the country, I would guess, in terms of the sheer concentration, sheer numbers. So there's every reason why NAU would be interested in this. And by the way, cut me off if I'm exceeding my time. So what are we doing? Well, the first thing I think we need to do, all the other universities need to do, I needed to do personally, not coming from the Southwest originally, is to take time to better understand what are the issues, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. And we've done that in a number of ways. And one way that's really helped us a lot is to invite two of you who are in this room to join our School of Forestry Advisory Council. So Leon Ben Jr. and Melvin Hunter Jr., would you mind raising your hands if you're here? You two have played enormously important roles in helping us understand the issues and to make some valuable connections. We've tried to connect with our Native American alumni to get out where they're working, to learn about their issues, but also to help enlist them in our efforts. And would you, who are alumni of the School of Forestry or NAU in general, raise your hands? Because there's a pretty good number of you here. Yeah, thank you so much. And really, really happy to have you and to see you actually graduating from our program and going to work in the field. And then coming to the ITC Symposium, we're here in force. There's a fair number of us here. And just getting out, I think that's important for any university. Get out and engage and meet and people and make connections. But more specifically, what are we doing to recruit Native students? Well, one thing is we work with the regular recruiters. Every university, every college probably has recruiters. Most of them are short-term hires. They don't necessarily know anything about forestry unless you make the effort to tell them about forestry. And so reaching out to those generalist recruiters is really important. Getting out ourselves, getting out to high school career fairs, getting out to the tribal colleges. We try to do that. Our resources are limited, our person power is limited, but we do that when we can. We do other kinds of outreach. One really exciting development is a partnership with San Carlos Apache College, and one of our alumni, Marvin Victor there, might raise your hand, Marvin. He's a two-time graduate of our program, and now he's teaching a course in Introduction to Forestry at San Carlos Apache College, which is a very new college. And that's helping with students that generate interest in forestry and helping them prepare for transferring to NEU. We have an articulation agreement with SIPI, Southwest Polytechnic Institute, and things like that help as well. Engaging with the youth camps. San Carlos Apache has a youth camp, and usually we'll send a person down there to interact with those students, maybe to have teach them how to use an increment core or something like that, get them engaged in forestry. We run our own youth camps. We have 3 week-long camps. One of them is happening this week, and that's for our 9, 10-year-olds. So get them interested early. So there are different techniques for recruiting, and then there's the retention. And a really key aspect of that is financial assistance. One thing I'm proud of is that we match the Truman Picard Scholarship. I think OSU and I think University of Washington also do that. So if any of our students get that scholarship, we match it. Another really exciting development was getting some funding from Weyerhaeuser Corporation to hire students. And so we have 6 Native students who are working all summer long. And part of that budget was allowed us to bring them here. So there are 6 students here. Would you mind raising your hands? One thing I encourage you all to do in the audience is to go meet them. I want them to meet you. You might need to be proactive and go meet them and talk to them and talk about what you do. It's good for them to learn. All kinds of support services are provided. We provide some directly through our school, but also we have a Native American Cultural Center, and that provides mentoring, support services, counseling, etc. I think I'm running out of time. Okay. I don't want to cut into other people's time. I'm primarily talking about undergraduate education, but we've had some really great successes at graduate education as well. Sarah Hoagland here is our first ever PhD Native American student graduate, and we're very excited and very proud to claim her as our first. But there are several others who have graduated recently, Jaime Yazzie, Marvin Victor, others that have graduated from our program at the graduate level as well as, in some cases, the undergraduate level. So we really are proud of some of our successes there. And the final thing I want to say is we have a partnership internally at NEU that I think would be of interest to some of you, and that is with the Ecological Restoration Institute. 2 of their employees are here. They're both directors of programs within ERI. So Jonathan Martin, would you mind raising your hand? Jonathan is now a new hire. Some of you may know him. He's a 2-time BIA regional forester, but he was just very recently hired to engage in tribal outreach from the Ecological Restoration Institute to the tribes, to the BIA, to the tribal colleges. And then Hansip Han, we stole him from Humboldt. Sorry, David Green, but we stole him from Humboldt. And he's a forest operations guy who's going to help in our region with the restoration efforts, part of which is making it more efficient in terms of harvesting and the economics of it. And the same challenges that the Forest Service, BLM face, tribal lands face as well. And so I encourage you to meet these 2 individuals and talk about how they might be able to assist you. And certainly they're assisting us in our outreach that we hope will help with recruitment and retention as well. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
So next panelist up is Dr. Sarah Hoagland. How can we best mentor Native students and early career professionals in natural resources? And what are some of the challenges that these populations face?
Thank you, Stephanie. And again, thank you for that great birthday song. I think this is the best singing group I've ever been around. And I do have to say that I think spending my birthday with this group of people is, I couldn't have asked for a better day, so thank you so much. It makes me happy to be here with you all and to talk about something that I'm really passionate about. So my goal is to not let anybody fall asleep because it is after lunch and it's the end of the day, so humor me here. This is a gift that I'd like to give back to all of you for what ITC has given to me over the years, and this is the gift of perspective. So please humor me on this. I'd like for you all to actively participate in this activity so we can collectively gain some perspective. So the first few questions are easy, and if you're comfortable with it, please participate. So raise your hand if you identify with the male gender. So this is not meant to exclude anybody, and keep your hand raised, please. Okay, so now keep your hand raised if you are a tribal member or a descendant. Okay, keep your hand raised, tribal members. Keep your hand raised if you went to and graduated college and obtained a bachelor's degree or master's or PhD. Keep your hand raised if you graduated college. Just keep your hand up if you went to college as a tribal member. Now the biggie. Keep your hand raised if you actually enjoyed sitting in class more so than being out in the forest. And this is a serious question. Okay, so how many hands are still up? Marvin, I love it, Marvin. Marvin's our poster child back there. Nice. Thank you, Marvin. Let's give him a hand. All right. So this story really is essentially, for many of you, you would rather be outside than sit through classes, right? And I think a lot of us got into forestry because that's what we're actually passionate about. So I guess for Marvin, the one person remaining in this room, Marvin, did you have a Native instructor in any of your college education within the natural resources? Cool. Okay, so Marvin did have one Native American faculty member within his course curriculum. So we do have one example. That's great. Nationally, the numbers are staggering in terms of people who actually meet some of these categories, who had the Native American mentorship while they're in higher education programs. And so we're really kind of wondering why we're struggling with this workforce problem. But we have to recognize that we're in a field that, for the most part, we all despise the indoor learning environment, right? We'd rather be outside. It's not like we're all computer engineers and we'd prefer to be inside. So that's one challenge. But additionally, we as Indian people are less than 2 to 3% of the population, yet we go through mainstream societal educational systems that's based on individual performance, which is contrary to our beliefs and our own passions, right? So now we also wonder why we have so many women in our field as well. We've been noticing a trend, though, through ITC. We have a fair amount of women who apply to our research scholarships and our Truman Picard Scholarship. And why is this? Women are slowly starting to close this gap, not only in forestry, but in higher education as well. Native women are adaptable, we're flexible, we have strong ties to our identity, and we are narrowing this gender gap over the last decade. So let's ask the same questions for women in the room. Raise your hand if you identify with the female gender. All right, keep your hands raised if you're a tribal member. Keep your hand raised if you actually enjoyed sitting in class. Okay, and then I want to know, like, our sample size here, if you had a Native professor in your natural resource college. Great, I think we got one way back there. Nikki, too, cool. Okay, shocking though, right? So this is what I'd like to describe as sort of a lag effect that we're seeing. Ask this question in maybe 10 to 20 years, and we may see more hands left at the end. I think what we're seeing in this lag effect is the impacts of the American Indian movement, which started in the 70s and promoted higher education for American Indians, which I'm kind of a classic product of. My grandmother, back in the 50s, received her bachelor's degree from Northern Arizona University, and then my mother received her master's degree in the 70s. And then 3rd generation later, I received a terminal degree in forestry. But how does this all relate to workforce? And again, how do we best mentor Native American students? I think we first have to recognize that we're really talking about a minority within a minority within a minority. So the leaders today who have suffered with a capital S through this system, in all reality, they've taken so much, it's taken a lot from them, right? We've had to leave our communities. In many ways, we feel like we're traitors in some sense. We've had to be sold out. We were taught that education is the one thing that they can't take away from you, which is what my grandmother told my mother, and my mother then told me. But we bit the bullet. We left our families, we left our comfort zones for the bigger picture, to represent our people and to utilize the tools and uphold the responsibilities that previous generations have fought so hard to provide for us all. So as far as developing our tribal workforce, it does involve this formal education piece, but it also involves professional training programs and practical experiences like some of the other folks on the panel will be talking about. Both of these paths and routes are really only tangible if you have, drum roll, and it gets to this question, mentors, native and non-native. We all need mentors. We need people who believe in you. That's really valuable. And mentors who tap into your energy that you have, whether it's the energy to be inside, calculating the imminent mortality, or being outside, measuring your 100th DRC of an alligator juniper for the day. That happens. Whatever that drive is, find that in those that you mentor. It puts the onus on all of us, like Jim asked at the very beginning. This is a duty for all of us to be engaged on. All of us in this room can be educators, and we can be role models. And what I'd like to ask each one of you is, who are you reaching down to and pulling up? Who is next in line to take your position? And if you can't come up with a name or a face in your head, come talk to me. So this main point on mentoring, I do a lot of mentoring of Native students, and I don't want to eat up all of our time here, but I'd like to just finish with saying some points on this last question about some of the challenges that Native students face. And a lot of this actually comes from a paper that Brianna Gervais, who used to be involved with the Intertribal Timber Council, and then 17 other Native American students compiled a paper for the Journal of Forestry special issue on tribal forestry about challenges that Native students face. And Native students, to describe them, we're humble, we're really quiet, we don't necessarily exuberate confidence, we're not really in it for ourselves, you know, we're really, it's hard for us to give ourselves credit, right, and boast about ourselves. All of these qualities can really hinder you in higher education, right? We're the students that sort of sit at the back of the room and just taught to listen and not barge in and ask questions. So some of the challenges that students face as far as going for higher education, it involves leaving home and relocating, spending time away from family and your own community. Oftentimes, like the students that we have at Salish Kootenai College, they're first-generation students. The funding piece, and again, like we pointed out with this exercise, there's a lack of Native mentors and advisors in higher education programs. But some of the supports that we identified in this paper were things like American Indian student clubs, like ACES. Don and I were just talking about ACES, that keep that connection to your culture, scholarships that are specific to Native students, that mentoring piece, and then interdisciplinary coursework that combine traditional knowledge with Western science is a real bonus. So bottom line here, which I think kind of summarizes some of the points in these questions, is Native students do have a really strong connection to the land, and they have a strong sense of reciprocity for giving back to not only the land, but their community. And I think Native students can deal with a lot of adversity. So the future is bright, and like we said in that quote, there's a 19% increase right now in Native students enrollment. So things are looking up. So with that, I will pass it back to Stephanie. Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to present from here.
So our next question is for Kelly Hetzler. So from a regional office perspective, how do we engage, recruit, and retain a talented workforce? And what are the agency mechanisms that we can utilize? Okay.
Thanks, Stephanie. And thank you to Stephanie and to Adrian for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's a subject that interests me greatly, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So thank you for the invitation. I'd like to share a little bit about our perspective at the Northwest Regional Office. As was mentioned in the beginning, I spent 17 years working for the San Carlos Apache tribe as a tribal employee. So I've only been with the Bureau for the last 3 years in the Northwest region. And so we've heard about the heyday of the time when there were 30 people in the regional office to support field folks, and we no longer have 30 people. We have 4 foresters and a wildlife biologist in forestry. We have a fire staff too, but of the 5 of us, 4 of us have worked for tribes directly and answered to tribal councils directly. So that, I think, affects the way that we approach how we do things from the region. And so one of our main focuses is to host regional meetings and allow people the chance to talk with one another, because we know that the expertise that we have is largely in the field with the tribes. And so we host regional meetings annually so that people have a chance to talk to one another. We host forest managers meetings, forest development meetings, timber sale meetings, inventory and planning meetings. Last week we did a silviculture field tour at an experimental forest. So we're trying to have opportunities for people to interface with one another so that people get to know each other and talk to one another. So communication and coordination is sort of a central theme there. So we're hosting all these meetings, and one day I thought, you know, we haven't done anything for the technicians. We should have a technician summit. And I said that, and it's been about 2 years now, and it keeps coming up, and I'm thinking, well, okay, now I need to do something. And so I thought of the different approaches that we could take with that, and the idea has really meandered in terms of what we could be doing with it. So I took it the direction of leadership themes and, you know, getting people to step into leadership roles, because that's an issue. I took it the direction of also of then the forest managers were asking for just technical training. And so the idea has really kind of sat and stewed for a while. And as was pointed out earlier with workforce development, you know, whose job is workforce development? It's everybody's job. And when I was at San Carlos, we used to have sort of an inside joke, and it went something like this. We'd be sitting around the table and we'd say, someone should do that. And it meant one of 2 things. It either meant somebody was in the room that it was sort of their cue to be like, okay, I'll do that, or B, it was often led with a heavy sigh of, yeah, somebody should, wish we had time, you know, wish we could do something, but we just don't have the time. Well, in being in the regional office, I looked around the room and thought, oh, somebody should do something, and thought, well, I'm somebody, so let's see what I can do. What can I do from this position? And so I guess the key theme then of what I see the region being able to provide is one of coordination. And so of those 2 ideas I mentioned, one of them we're just trying out right now for the first time, and I'm calling it the Forrester Exchange. And it's sort of the have a penny, leave a penny concept of, you know, each tribe might have expertise in 3 or 4 different areas, but maybe they're lacking in another. And so they could invite people to come spend the week with them out in the field or go to meetings. And this thought kind of came from the idea that people have different learning styles. As Sarah mentioned, some people are fine in the classroom looking at PowerPoint presentations, but other people are hands-on learners or prefer to be in the field. Some people like to learn in groups. Others like to learn one-on-one in a more quiet setting, or maybe just out in the woods learning how to do things. So this Forrester Exchange was really meant to meet part of that need, where I thought, well, technicians, you know, again, back to the idea of the technician summit, they can go visit with other tribes and, you know, go learn how to do cruising in a similar forest type or inventory, or how to administer a timber sale contract. But the more that I thought about it, again, this idea has been evolving. The more that I thought about it, the more I thought, well, it's not just technicians that need that. Professional level foresters could use this, forest managers could use this. Maybe somebody has an ID team that doesn't work very well, and maybe someone else has an ID team that does. And so basically, we've set aside a little bit of funding to support travel costs to get people to one another's reservations to visit. And the forest managers, by and large, have been wonderful. Many of them are in the room, and they've humored me with these ideas. So they all sent back a spreadsheet filled out with the have a penny and need a penny sort of concept, where areas that they can host somebody with a particular area where they have an expertise, and then areas where they need some help. And so I've kind of left it at that, hoping they'll call one another. I've offered that I can facilitate calls and such, but we'll see at the end of this season what works from that. So they've had regional meetings to get to know one another, first name basis, develop some of those relationships, and now I'm hoping we'll actually have some of that exchange. So the other aspect of this then too, and trying to meet the training need, is realizing how many different aspects to workforce development there are. And so we've talked about education, and so people get degrees, but there are multiple ways people are entering the workforce. They get degrees and enter the workforce, or sometimes they're coming straight from the community and going into the workforce. So we have various levels of training needs that we need to be meeting. And so the colleges are doing an excellent job of giving the educational background, but what I see is a need for some operational training as well, where we could help, especially picking up those that haven't gone to a 4-year university. So this year we're also going to be making our first effort at trying to get a regional level operational trainings started for the various aspects of forest management that we can do as sort of a continuing education. So really, I say this to say we'll see next year, maybe by next year we'll have some good results to share, but those are just two things that I can think of that, we're trying to do from the regional level, and it falls under the area of coordination. So we have tied that, if I had to tie that to ITC's strategic plan, which I think Cody's going to talk a little bit more about, I'm really glad to see that strategic plan, because talking about workforce development to me is just like talking about forestry. There's so many topics that we can focus on, so many different directions we can go. So stratifying that conversation, I think, is going to be really helpful. So if I had to place what I think I'm working on in the region under one, it would be under the strategic pillar number 1, the develop organizational capacity to collaborate with partners to implement workforce development strategies. So if I had to lump it into a category, I think that's where I would put it. So I guess bottom line, what I see from the region is that we can help with coordination and communication amongst tribes where the expertise lies, and then filling in pieces where we need to get help to support those efforts. So thank you.
And our last panelist, Cody, my questions for you are from an operational perspective. What are some of the challenges the tribe faces in recruiting from this new demographic, and how do you recruit through local schools, internship programs to get the work done on the ground?
Thank you, Stephanie. I think it's probably easier to start with the first one. This is something we've been challenged with for the 20 years I've worked in forestry. It used to be fairly simple to get kids engaged in natural resource stuff, especially fishery stuff, where they could play with fish and do other things that were cool. But what we've seen over the last probably 10 years is a transition from people interested in natural resources to other types of fields. Things that kept them in town, I think primarily things that kept them close to cell phone service. Colorado's kind of isolated, and when they don't have cell phone service, they want to get back to the office very quickly. So we have struggled with that. I think the recruiting needs to start early. We need to engage with those kids, probably at the grade school age, show them aspects of natural resource management that are interesting for some of those that identify with technology, show them that there's lots of opportunities for even technological use in forestry, whether that be forestry operations, running logging equipment, using LiDAR, remote sensing type applications to help with management. But engaging those kids, trying to show them where there's areas of interest, where there's opportunities, because I don't know about all reservations, but I know on many reservations, opportunities are pretty limited for a lot of kids if they want to stay home and have productive careers that provides a good lifestyle for them. From an operational perspective, we've been fairly lucky at home. We've been able to grow our own for the most part. We have seen that same trend in Cowherd as they have across Indian Country, where when I started in forestry 20 years ago, there was a lot of higher level managers that had came from Eastern schools who were non-Indians, who had been with the BIA for a very, very long time, and ended up in supervisory positions at Cowherd. And over the 20 years I've been there, those have almost all transitioned out. I would say that we probably have a higher percentage of tribal members in BIA positions now than we do even in our own Cowherd tribal government. So that, I think, is a huge success. The fact that we have 19% more students is a good thing, but we definitely need more than that. But the other challenge we face from an operational perspective is that once we get those kids back, we need to put them in a position to be successful. So what we've tended to see in Indian Country, and most of this information comes from observations from things we hear across the board at ITC, is that there's so few kids coming back that really they have great opportunities for advancement really early in their career, so they don't have the operational experience to make them really effective managers moving forward. So you'll get a kid that comes back from school and, well, I've got my bachelor's degree in forestry, there's no other Indians at the tribe that have a bachelor's degree in forestry, well, I want to be the forest manager. Okay, well, you can probably apply for it and you will probably get it, but this kid has walked in the door from college, has zero experience with how pre-sales work, how forest development works, how scaling works, how any components of forestry actually function at the agency or at the tribe. So they really struggle as managers to try to keep the day-to-day operations functional, and if they can, if there's issues that come up, they really deal with how to address those. So I think mentorship is an important component of that. Some of those that have come up through the ranks that had to work through some of those different disciplines within the forestry and fire programs and understand how complex it can be, and have seen different challenges come down the road and found solutions to those. I think those are important opportunities to share with young managers, because we don't want to discriminate against those kids, but it's definitely better if they can experience the multitude of things we do in forestry and fire. I would say that the other opportunity we have and how we're trying to face this is through education. We've got a number of people who are in technician type positions who are very, very qualified, really good at managing people, surprisingly, for not having any technical training, any professional training. They just kind of the personality they have. But with them being technicians and many of those supervisory positions being professional series, we need to get some type of secondary education for those folks. So I know that Salish Kootenai College has worked with Yakima over the last couple of years with some outreach training that I think could be a real potential option to help get those kids, or they're not even kids, most of them are adults, probably my age, that could get them the education they need to meet some of those 401 requirements or to meet some of those requirements individual tribes have for those professional level positions. I know that online classes become more and more available all the time, and I think that's a real opportunity to try to train some of those folks that we have that are very capable, but like Kelly said, many of them have gone to work right out of high school, many of them have families, many of them have mortgages, many of them have a lot of things, a lot of commitments at home that don't allow them to go back to school now. So we need to find ways to try to get past those challenges, give them the opportunities for advancement. And I think many of those folks, they started at home, they are much, much more likely to stay at home. So that's kind of how we've tried to address it from a Cowherd perspective, but it's definitely been a challenge. We've seen people migrate away from natural resource programs, and some of the fire programs that used to get them into natural resources early in their careers are becoming more difficult to get in. EFFs being probably the best example. We've seen that across the country. Using Cowherd as the example, 20 years ago, if we had a good fire season, we could call on EFFs and we'd have no less than 200 respond. The last 2 years we've had 18. And I mean, they feel rigged in me. I mean, Bern, I think there's a pile of us in this room that could say we started in some type of firefighting career very, very early, probably directly out of high school, that kind of intrigued us. and pushed us into natural resource fields. So I think that's another opportunity we need to look at. How do we re-engage those kids? How do we provide some gainful employment that shows some interest in natural resource fields, and then encourage that through a mentorship program to try to get them to at least a technical level, and hopefully to some of them to a professional level, so we can fill that gap. Because we saw what the demographics look like, that many of those folks over 50, over half, and I think fire probably looks, if you just took the fire perspective, it's probably actually worse than that. I know going to BIA national meetings for the last half a dozen years, and they give me a show of hands of people retiring in the next 5 years. It seems like half the room holds their hand up. So that's a very scary thing, especially from a fire perspective. There's a lot of experience, a lot of qualifications that'll be really, really difficult to replace, and especially from a fire perspective, those guys have intimate knowledge of how to fight fire, and that's not a on-the-job training kind of job. You definitely want somebody looking over your shoulder that has some perspective that will keep you out of dangerous situations, especially life-threatening situations like you face in fire. So again, trying to work on fire along with the forestry side to make sure that we engage that next group, and hopefully have another cohort of managers coming up 20 years behind me to take my job. That's all.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. So now we're going to move into, our Q&A session. I just realized my slide. There we go. All right, so we would really like to now open up the floor. Adrian Layton over there, he's going to be running a mic, and you can also step up to the mic over on that side of the room too. Oh, okay, Rob's going to be running the mic. Okay. So some questions to consider, and if you have something to say and a comment, if you want to share your experience in workforce development, please do. This is a collaborative learning space, and we're all actively learning together right now. And some questions to think about, just to get your brain thinking here too, if you haven't already done that. But what challenges do you see at home on your reservation with the workforce? And what needs to happen in the next 10 years in order for us to address the issue of workforce development in Indian country? Just mull over that. Anybody else have any other questions, comments, suggestions? Thank you.
No, not it.
Hello, Waka Waka. All right, Gary Morishima from Quinault. I have a quick question for Kelly. Kelly, just a couple observations. One, I'm very impressed with your exchange program. I think it's a great idea. Is there any thought about how you might expand that in terms of other regions? The second question is there any ability to try to find resources to enable some of the folks that are retired or about to retire to participate in this program? It's a concept that I've termed over the years the Warhorse Brigade. Basically those folks that have left the workforce but still feel that they have an opportunity or they have something to give back, and provide a mechanism to enable them to do so.
Sure, thanks, Gary. Yeah, those are great questions. For your first question about plans to expand to other regions, one of the things that I've noticed now going to a couple national meetings is how different the regions are from one another. I was actually kind of surprised at the diversity and the roles regions play across the country. But that being said, I thought I would just try it here, try it in the Northwest, see if it worked, and then if it works, then I'll definitely share that at national meetings and encourage other regions to try it as well. It's a lot of people work, a lot of talking to people, and I know foresters, we don't always like to do that. But yeah, so I'll see how that goes, and I would like to share that if it works. And then, you know, of course, I guess no idea really is ever new. And to your second question to the retired folks, we do have a retired forester who said to me, oh yeah, we used to do exchanges like that. We used to go from one reservation to another. So I guess it's not even really a new idea, but one that we're recycling, and recycling is in. So yes, we do. In fact, at the silviculture tour last week, we had a retired silviculturist who still participates in meetings and has come on. And so definitely, I know of a couple tribes that have brought on retired foresters, but that is something else that's a great idea to bring them on and help with some of the training, especially the mentorship parts. And a couple of the retired folks have offered for mentorship opportunities in particular. So then we look for creative ways to get them, you know, compensated for doing that. But most have just volunteered, saying, yes, we'll do that. So I'll keep those in mind. Thanks.
Hello. Hello. This just a comment on Cody's point about the newly grad coming to the office wanting the manager's job. Just an observation. I think it's really important that students go out and get a wide variety of operational, practical experience away from reservation, if possible. I think that's why I learned quite a bit off reserve, and teaches a lot of other stuff about time management and a whole bunch of other things. But I think it's really important to get that really operational, practical experience in a wide variety of areas, and then I think it will benefit you a lot better when you come into the community.
I completely agree. That's why I said that we've tried, or we've had the best success with managers who have had to work their way up through the system. Those that have come back from school and immediately jumped into management type positions were nowhere near as successful, because that operational perspective is huge to being effective at managing your staff, trying to accomplish what those operational objectives are. So that's been a key for us when trying to recruit that next crop. And those that do well at the operational level, usually we kind of try to keep an eye on those folks, because they tend to do well at the management level too.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I'm Jaime Yazzie, and I'm a recent graduate. So my question is sort of open to all of you, is that what ways are you, well, with a lot of Native youth up and coming, a lot of them are interested in revitalizing Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous science, but in my own experiences and talking with others, they have faced challenges in that being accepted, not only academically, but within just in general through the workforce. So I want to hear, what are your experiences in being inclusive of other ways of knowing, and if you faced a challenge with it?
First, Sarah? Yeah, sure. So I don't think that's necessarily an issue they have with tribes, in my experience anyways, but Congress keeps expanding the authorities tribes have to work with federal agencies, and when you have that type of perspective, say, that is shared with the Forest Service, sometimes we're a bit challenged on that unless there's good research to back up whatever those recommendations are. So I agree completely. Cowherd has a similar history, a very fire-prone ecosystem, largely because of traditional burning practices. And when we try to explain that those ecosystems that are there now are there because of the manipulation of historical burn patterns, that a lot of times the Forest Service staff will point to, well, we don't necessarily see that in the literature, so it's hard for us to move forward with some type of proposal like that. So it's definitely a challenge for federal agencies. For tribes, I don't think so.
So, sorry. Thanks, Jaime, for that question. And if I understand it correctly, you're kind of asking of, well, I guess what immediately came to thought was I feel like we're constantly in this struggle and sort of this trap as Native people who are working in a Western paradigm centric, or however you want to call it. We're constantly caught between like maintaining our traditions and maintaining our culture and maintaining those practices, kind of like what Cody was talking about, but also like learning to adapt in a modern world and like with our cell phones, right? We all want to get back into the office so we can use our cell phones. I don't know, we're just like constantly in that space of like bridging those two gaps. And I think it is challenging. And I mean, incorporating TEK in publications is still so new. We're still at that frontier that it's generally not accepted, and we're still continuing to have to validate the stuff that we actually know and the things that are in our stories and, you know, our practices that we've used and have sustained our generations for a really long time. You know, that puts a lot of responsibility on all of our shoulders too, because we kind of understand these two worlds and these two dynamics, but I think just one day at a time and learning from each other and how we can live in that kind of controversial or uncomfortable space, I think is what's helpful. I don't know if that answers your question.
I'll just add that I think the universities can do a lot more, a lot better. Marvin Victor back there mentioned a faculty member who has since retired, who apparently had a positive impact on him. I think more Native American faculty members would really, really be helpful. But we need to get messages out, not just to Native American students, but to all students, especially ones that may work for federal agencies, where I think a much greater appreciation of TEK, of cultural issues of importance. All forestry students, I think, need to get a little more than they do, probably a lot more than they do in a typical forestry program. I would like to see us do better at addressing some of those issues.
And I can say I definitely saw a pretty drastic shift in my tenure at San Carlos. So the forestry program was run by the Bureau in the 80s, and it was contracted, I think, around 1989. So in the 1990s is really when the tribe took over the contract to run the forestry program. We still were left with a legacy of government funding goes to that which goes to the sawmill, which is ponderosa pine, board feet, despite the fact that there were hundreds of thousands of acres of woodland. So we had that focus for a while, but a couple things changed in that shift. One was the recognition of mean fire return interval and realizing that if we only burned activity fuels from timber sales, we would not be able to restore fire on the landscape, and we needed to go bigger. And that was coupled with information from the tribal elders who said this is how things used to be. This is how they set our direction and said how they wanted it to be. And that was coupled with not having a lot of Western science anyway, but that was fine because we had the elders who knew already how things should be. And we knew that if we started to get back plants that were important to elders, then we were on the right track. If we didn't, then we were on the wrong track. So that really guided forest management. And in the couple of years that I was there, it was a pretty drastic and radical shift in management direction to really accept that, acknowledge it, embrace it through the tribe's IRMP, and move forward. That being said, then coming to the region, one of the things I've observed is that if a tribe seems to be moving along pretty well, it means and my job is inventory and planning. And so it means if they've gone along pretty well, they've done a pretty good job of incorporating those traditional values. But at times when I see a lot of internal conflict, that tells me there's a disconnect between the forest management plan and tribal values. And so that's when I start working from the planning side to work more, not to direct or say what to do, but just to listen and be open to other goals, other values, to get those incorporated into the plan to have more harmony with how the forest is being managed.
Okay, it's working. I think this needs to be approached from all the different directions, even from the tribal side. What I've seen in the past is students that go off to school, and then when they come back or try to come back, they're not accepted anymore. I sometimes see that graduates are second guessed, the tribal graduates, you know, like questioning what they know, questioning how traditional they are or aren't. And I think that creates a lot of difficulties, and I've seen quite a few Native students leaving the reservation because of that, because they're not accepted anymore. And there has to be a place for us, you know, there has to be some kind of welcoming. I mean, not, you know, bowing down to the prodigal son or something like that, but accepting, yes, we are changed. All knowledge changes you. And just going with that, you know, that's a really hard thing, I think, for tribal people to work for their own tribe and to gain that acceptance.
So Melvin Hunter Jr., BI Mescaler Agency. So just a question, two questions, but my experience as an Indian Affairs employee is that, you know, long term there's not a lot of, or too much planning for Indian Affairs as a whole, or whether it's positions. And I always go back to the example of Weyerhaeuser, and they said in the next 10 years we're going to have 300 positions open. And through their programs and grants and the kids that are coming up through Indian Affairs, to me that's saying, or through Weyerhaeuser is successful, but I'm often concerned about that next cohort of folks that are coming in and moving forward and going to backfill in our positions. And it's just not the position, but it's critical positions, you know, the GS 11s, 12s, 13s, the civil culturists. You know, right now what I'm seeing is we have really a disconnect in timing to get that filled within a short parameter. It's probably not likely, but it's going to be within the next 5 or 10 years. But really, what's the outlook and how do we beat that? And you know, some of the options are, pathways been mentioned, there's co-ops agreements with universities, Salish Kootenai, there's SIPI, there's Haskell, there's all these different areas, but it's just it's always been a concern for me as an Indian Affairs employee. In addition to that, maybe you can answer that and that question will come back to me. I was thinking.
So I agree that we need to make sure that when we have kids that are committed, that put in the time to go away and get educated, we come back, that we grab them quickly, because other folks do. The Forest Service has called me a number of times. Do you have any kids that are coming out of college? And I'll just flat lie to them. Nope. Don't have any, because I'm taking them all. I don't tell them I'm taking them all, but I'm trying to get them all. But from the perspective of how do we get that next crop, that's really the challenge that we face with this strategic plan. It takes some mentors, some people that push people into uncomfortable positions, whether that be a leadership position, a manager position, up on a panel like this, something that pushes you further than what you're comfortable with so that you just progressively grow as an employee. And I don't know that we do a great job with that. Lots of folks will settle into a position and they'll stay there for their entire career, like a GS 8 or 9 position. And we really need to find a way to push those folks, especially those very, very capable folks, to do more. Because what we do in Indian country is if somebody's a hard worker, we'll work them hard. It doesn't matter if they're a GS 9 or a GS 15. If they're a workhorse, they will get worked. So we need to find ways to push those folks, because those are very intelligent, very motivated people that should be the figureheads of our departments, that will serve as that example, will serve as that motivation for that next crop of people, that I want to be like that guy. And then try to identify those for the people that are in the higher level positions. Who is my next workhorse? And identify him and make sure that him or her gets that training, that education, whatever they need to put them on that path to be that next level manager. Again, I don't know how exactly we do that. That's almost a tribe by tribe decision and process, because it's going to work different for everybody, but that's definitely the challenge we see with the workforce development plan. How do we engage that process? How do we ensure that individual tribes or regions, try to accomplish that over the very short term because we see what the demographics look like, and then longer term, once we fill those gaps for those folks that are going out the door, how do we make sure we always have a crop behind them so that we always have that next forest manager, FMO, whoever it may be. And again, looking at those new Farm Bill authorities, Congress has given us the ability to do more work on federal land. So not only are we going to have to manage what we have at home, we're going to have to manage what federal agencies have across the fence from us. So there's a huge responsibility and opportunity sitting out in front of us right now.
No, I agree, and I only bring up that question because I just believe in the higher education and really, you know, the youth of the tribes. And if we're experiencing this half on Indian affairs, you know, through the contracts and our agreement with the tribes, then we're also affecting tribal government. But just thought I'd surface that. Thank you.
Don Motanic, ITC. I have two questions. One is for Jim. Vinnie Carraro and I made a presentation at the University of Idaho. It was interesting that they told us that they tracked, there's 300 students there, forestry students at University of Idaho, and they track where they do a survey with their students about where they would, where they may work. They give them opportunity, private industry, Forest Service, state. And they also include tribe in their survey, and out of 300 students, 70 of those students said they would consider working for a tribe. Do you have a survey like that, Jim, at your school about where where they plan on working?
No, we do not have a survey like that. We survey our students occasionally after they graduate to get an idea of where they go, but no, we do not ask them in advance where they might be interested in going. Maybe we should, though, apparently.
Yeah. One thing I will say is when I was at NAU, Kristen Waring, who taught the graduate level silviculture course, which I was enrolled in at the time, we ended up taking that class to the White Mountain Apache reservation, and compared it to the adjacent national forest. And after that field trip that they took, all the students in the class were like gung-ho and interested in working for some tribes. And so that was kind of their first opening to looking at a reservation and some of the operations that they had going on, and then considering them as an employer. So at least we had that one small group of students at the graduate level who then said that, yeah, they'd be excited to go back and work for a tribe upon graduation.
My second question is a hand-raising question for the panel. Of the panel members, raise your hand if you're native. Okay, keep your hand raised. It's just a question. You're asking.
It's hard to do, right? It's hard to do. I should have practiced.
Keep your hand raised. High. Okay, this is real interesting of the demographics. Keep your hand raised if you did not grow up on a reservation. If you grew up on a reservation, lower your hand.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when gentlemen from the First Nations they did the demographic of there's 454 tribal members on the reserve, and 200 of them lived off the reservation, and about 50%. And it's one of the questions was the new demographics, and the new demographics kind of shows up with our panel. Our young, I'm thankful ITC has a younger panel for a change, but the thing is, this panel represent our new demographics, that 2/3 of our panel did not grow up on the reservation, and between 50 and 70% of our tribal members, our students, are not on the reservation. So I guess for any of the panel members that might want to answer, how do we connect? And I know there's two that, maybe Stephanie and Sarah could say, well, what brought you to Indian country? And welcome. We're glad you're here.
So yeah, I grew up off my reservation in Northern California, but my mom, it's funny, I see myself now celebrating my birthday at an Indian meeting, and I spent so many days as a little kid at Indian meetings with my mom, like running around asking when we can go home. And so I think my mom actually was pretty good about keeping me involved in the Native community in Northern California, even though it wasn't my own tribal community. But once I got to college is really kind of where my identity sort of came through, I think, and it was through ASIS, the American Indian Student Science and Engineering Society. And then ASIS brought me to ITC and to Dawn in particular, and this group and the scholarship programs and stuff like that. So I think student organizations, I think, is helpful. I think, you can still practice your traditions even though you aren't like there at home. But the neat thing now is, as an adult, I'm going back, and I can go back and hunt at Laguna, and it really means a lot to me. And I'm working with the Mescalero Apache tribe on my research, so it's fun to like come full circle on it. In some senses, I'm really glad that Thora made that point about not feeling welcome sometimes coming back. Like sometimes I do feel that a little, but yeah, I don't know. Sorry, now I'm lost for words because I got all emotional on my birthday up here. Stephanie, your turn. Hand off.
Don't get emotional. I'm going to get emotional. I guess, so why I came back is maybe like I never left in the first place. I think that's something to consider. But I guess like physical location, yes, I was born off the reservation in Los Angeles. How that happened, my mom was adopted by a non-native family when she was really young, and she grew up in Los Angeles, and that's where she met my dad and settled down roots there. She did maintain contact with her family and her brothers, and I grew up around that culture sort of towards the edges. Though when I started going into higher education and considering college, that's really when higher education became this journey for both my mother and I of connecting back to her culture and my culture and finding out more about her birth mother and my family and meeting all of the cousins and aunties and uncles that I have. So that's really, I guess, my journey back in a sense. Why I'm still in this profession, or why I'm still trying to make change, is that I've always felt a really strong connection to the land, and that's just how I was raised, and to be really intentional and appreciate and take care of your land, and to, it's not enough to love a place, but we must heal it. And Robin Wall Kimmerer said that, and that's kind of a motto I've tried to live by, and that's what I'm trying to take into my professional career. Yeah.
It's on. Okay, so my name's Yvette Lacey. I'm from Warm Springs, Oregon, and my comment is to, is it Sarah? Mm-hmm. Sarah, hi, Sarah. So I just was like super happy that you shared, and this is like really cool. Thank you for being so honest. But I'm super interested in Kelly's program. So the Forrester Exchange. And so don't take this like personal. But in Indian country, females know that, our places basically were to raise the children, to cook, to clean, know our place, know our purpose. But, we birth the children, and we also address the cultural foods. That's also our duty and responsibility and purpose in life. And so I've been trying to work with Kelly I met her at our homeland, and it's always a scheduling thing, and but I'm getting there. I'm like super close. I could just like feel it, and I'm so proud of the region where I come from. They work so hard and they're so ambitious, but what my question is how does the region that I'm from know how many students there are, what colleges they're in, and like, how do you place them in these positions? Because, you know, I got inspired by my daughter. She's on her way to getting her master's, which is really crazy. You know, she told me to walk through the door, and so I did, and I love school. It's just like, it's huge. It's an, you know, I'm impacted. I was born on the reservation, but my whole family are like, on my mom's side, are all PhDs too. I'm just like in awe. You know, I kind of started life a little slow, but where I live, I know there's a lot of lack of trust. There's the unknown of leaving the reservation, you know, and it's a big concern for me, you know, because I think that regardless what race we are and, you know, how old we are or how young we are, we always have something to offer, you know, the other person. And, you know, we're a diverse people. I think it's important, you know, because like we asked who was Native American, you know, my advisor at Central Oregon Community College, she was, she got her master's, then her PhD in dendrology. She's like this cool woman. She's not Native American, but she's like my advisor, and she's helping me. And so my question to Kelly would be, because I'm learning from a non-Native American, does that make me less Native American in your eyes? Because that's the way people are. I'm like, you know, they're jerks. You know, and I'm sorry, but, I mean, you know,
Yeah, they're selfish.
I feel really uncomfortable going to school because I don't get accepted for it, but I don't even care. If I was going to be accepted for it, I'd be drunk yet, you know, trying to fit in. But, you know, I really encourage more. I don't know if it's like a gender issue with us as Native Americans, and if I'm out of line for casting out a pole on the scaffold or shooting a buck and skinning it out, or, you know, if I'm just learning how to beadwork. I mean, you know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but you know what? I feel good. You know, I mean, just listening to these ladies, it empowers me, you know, and I just, that's my question to Kelly, though. I'd just like to hear what you have to say about me learning from a non-native. What is your thought about that for me? You know, because I think spiritually, I believe that we all pray to one God in the story, so.
Thanks, Yvette. I am non-native, that's true. I've tried my very best to embrace the values and ideals of the tribe that I worked for in order to carry that on and encourage the next generation. And while I might not be Native, I can reach my hand out to anybody who's trying to come up. You know, I'll reach my hand out to you and to anyone else that is saying, hey, what should I do? What direction should I go? How can I make a difference? How can I make a change? And as we pull up one another's hands, your hands, then we'll pull up other hands. And I think that's how it's going to happen, is just working one person at a time. But I do want to address your point about people being jerks. And also because a couple of you have touched on it now, of going away, not being welcome back in your community, and having a hard time. And I think there are certain things that I sort of took for granted about what it meant to be in forestry, especially being in forestry as a woman. It meant not acknowledging that I was a woman. It meant just being one of the guys, basically learning communication skills and styles, learning how to communicate like a man. To get the job done, and I've always worked very well. I've had with men, you know, and women both. I haven't particularly had a problem, But I have noticed, especially looking at the demographics from the Pathways program, that 63% of the degrees in natural resources are going to Native American women, but they still comprise 15% of our professional workforce. So to me, that says people are getting trained, they're getting educated, but somehow they're dropping out of the workforce. And so we have a gender gap. But I think it's more than just a gender gap. I think if you look at how you entered the workforce and think back to it. And, you know, I've been to enough places now, so nobody here is guilty, right? Just seeing, you know, if you have a workplace culture where there's bullying or where there's harassment or intimidation or, you know, especially amongst field crews, that's a really good place to find it first. And then, you know, there's just been this acceptance of, well, that's how things are. You just got to put up with it and move on. But I think that there's an opportunity here for us to look at having more effective workplace environments and look at how we treat one another. So again, this is the audience participation part of the panel where you don't necessarily have to say anything, but it's something to think about as you go home. It was pretty eye-opening for me. There was a Forest Service insect and disease technical workshop last December. And on their agenda at a technical workshop was effective workplace environments. And so I thought, you know, that's pretty good. They're starting to address workplace environments. So I definitely see some opportunities for all of us when we go home to think about ways that we can make things easier. We know we have challenges and stresses with lack of resources, lack of funding. We're under a lot of pressure to accomplish a lot, and so trying to find ways to keep our good humor and treat one another with kindness and respect, I think there's opportunities for us going forward. So I thank you for your comments.
Jim Derglow, Intertribal Timber Council Fire Technical Specialist Contractor. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. You know, we've been looking at this issue for a long time, and it's been well documented in the IFMAT reports or the previous IFMAT reports. Recently, the Intertribal Timber Council completed their Workforce Development Strategic Plan. And I know, you know, that the BIA is working perhaps on a Workforce Development Strategic Plan. I think that we know things. We know that we need to recruit. We know that we need to educate. We know that we need to train. We know that we need to provide leadership and mentorship opportunities. And I think it's time to implement, you know, some of the things that, or take action perhaps. Take action on the things that we know. And it would be unfortunate, you know, in 10 years' time that we're continuing to talk about the need to develop a workforce development plan. You know, I think the time for planning is over, and that we need to collectively, with BIA, with Intertribal Timber Council, with academia, to, you know, put some wheels on the bus and get something done. I know that, you know, the ITC, you know, like I said, recently completed the plan, but we're not implementing it, you know, to the point where we should be. So perhaps the discussion should be, or the question to the panel, how do we implement workforce development? And who's going to take the lead on that?
Can I answer? Is that okay? So how I got into this panel a little bit, just a background on that. So I work at EcoTrust. It's a nonprofit organization based in Portland, Oregon. We're in part with ITC and USET and AT&I and Heritage University, and we're trying to implement a workforce development. Like, we're actually like boots on the ground, let's get this happening. And some of you may have received a survey from Don Metanek this winter. It is still open, and what that survey is doing, it's identifying host sites. So if you are a tribe that, or if you have a tribal affiliated project in forestry that you are looking for Native interns for, staff, underemployed adults, we want to know about it so that way we can collectively as a group And again, I'm speaking from like AT&I, ITC. You said it's not just an eco-trust thing, and I really want to emphasize that. And it's not just a forestry thing. We have economic development people trying to tackle this problem from the education perspective as well, and from, right, like ITC and natural resource professional stewardship. So just to kind of like wrap up my elevator pitch here real quick, if you haven't taken the survey, please take it. What's going to happen is in the fall, I'm actually going to be creating a survey for Native students and high school students and young adults to figure out how we can best address those communication challenges from them. I want to hear from them, and I think we need to hear from them. And that's in part of from a meeting that I had with Jim and Cody back in fall, I think, before the board meeting, when the ITC workforce plan was just a draft, and we wanted to address the collaboration and the communication challenges. So from there, then, in summer of 2020, we're looking to place, right now we only have funding for about 7 Native interns, but we're actively fundraising. I just finished and wrapped up like 4 grant proposals. So we are doing something, I want to say that, and this is the opportunity for us to really come together and collaborate and see like what great programs are already out there that tribes are doing. What are those models of integrating traditional ecological knowledge with professional development? What sort of projects are you doing that you're ready and you want like a Native intern or a student or an underemployed adult to come and help out on that project and train them? So yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that.
Jim, I couldn't agree with you more on the implementation piece. I get kind of antsy about these things too. It's like, we talk about this forever. Like, what are we actually going to do like today, right now, when we're all out of this room? But I think recognizing that implementation is going to take time. This is, it's not going to happen overnight. Things aren't going to change right away, but it does involve each one of us taking a piece of this workforce development issue. I will share one success story that I know of that at least has happened in the last, maybe 3 years through the ITC with our research scholarship that the Forest Service supports. One of our scholars, Crystal Tolley Cordova, just finished her PhD, and she's from the Navajo Nation, received that scholarship, and then now she's the hydrologist for the Navajo Nation. And so things are happening. It's like these little success stories that we can look to as highlights, but I think just knowing that implementation is going to take a little bit of time.
I've been jotting down a few really concrete pieces of advice, none of which is going to solve the whole problem, but these are things that maybe some of you can get involved in that I think would help with the overall idea of workforce development. In some cases, you may be able to get on an advisory council. I mentioned 2 of our alums who are on advisory council for our school. Wouldn't necessarily need to be the one you graduated from. Maybe it's the one in your own backyard. But to me, it's been really, really helpful to have those 2 folks, Leon and Melvin, on our advisory council. Hearing what I did today, I'd love to get a female member on the advisory council. That we have females who are non-native, and they've been really wonderfully helpful. So that's a goal that I'm going to try to achieve. Sarah? Think about guest lectures. Be willing to go and give a guest lecture. It could be at your local college. It could be at your local high school. Maybe even your local elementary school. Maybe it could be a youth camp. Go not only lecture, but maybe get the students involved in some activity. Take them out. Show them how to measure the height of a tree or something like that. Take students to lunch or dinner. We occasionally have our advisory council members do that with our students. There are students here. Sit with them at lunch, do something like that. Just talk to students wherever you may be. Take them to lunch or dinner. Go to the local career fairs. A lot of the high schools have career fairs. You can go and represent your employer, possibly in conjunction with your alma mater or your local college, have a tag team sort of approach about the opportunities. Convey a positive message. We heard that there's jobs out there, that maybe there's even competition for the few graduates that we have. There are tons of opportunities right now for our graduates. We're seeing that. Convey a positive message about that. Be a mentor, and if you're in a position to provide any kind of financial support for interns, or like Weyerhaeuser has done for the 6 students that are here, Some of you I know are in positions of influence where you might have control over a budget and may be able to do that, hire folks. They could be even high school kids. We need to reach out and hire people and give them professional opportunities that are paid. So those are just some advice, little bits of advice that I think cumulatively can contribute to this idea of taking action on workforce development.
Yeah, James, I really appreciate the very concrete advice that you've given. And Jim Derglow, I just wanted to take your advice and try to get some wheels on the bus and get that bus engaged. So I'm Fred Clark, and I'm with the Forest Service. So, of course, this has to go to our representative there from Colville from his statement about the Forest Service. So, Cody, do you have any upcoming students coming out of college now?
Yeah, one really bad one.
I just wanted to share a little bit of background about what we do for mentorship and getting some of the kids involved at Colville. We start with the Killers School District. We kind of started doing a forestry day for them, and it evolved into a bigger thing. One of the ITC people, his name's Spoosman Wilder, he helped us write a grant for GIS, and for the past few months we've been working with the kids, doing work with the tablets, doing a few other things, taking points, doing routes, area calculation. They wanted to develop a garden, and I have kind of a background in construction, so I volunteered to help them kind of lay it out and get their points, etc. And then it kind of involved into doing some other things with GPS units and stuff, and they actually have guidelines they got to meet to keep that grant, so our department's been making sure they've gotten any help they can from us. We just recently did a project, we named it Bobcats for Habitat. We did like a stream side SMZ, a riparian zone that were adjacent to a logging block, and we just showed them the importance of saving you know, stream sites, leaving riparian zones, etc. But with that being said, it really starts with the people in your department. You got to reach out to these younger people and tell them they're capable of doing more than they think they are. That's where I'm at with the Bobcats. That's 4th to 6th graders. And then we go above that and we have a senior youth employment program from the tribe. They give us 4 employees every summer, and we work these kids in the forestry field. They're held to standards that our technicians are held to, and at the end of the summer, it really gives them an idea of what forestry is. You know, it's not all fun and games. There is a lot of hard work involved. So it gives them a chance to get a feel of what forestry actually is, and if it is for them. Because if it's not, it's best to find out now. We worked with a few students last year, and 3 of them are returning, and one of them is going to go to Fish and Wildlife. And one of them is a high school graduate. He's our summer youth worker this summer, and he's actually going to go on to college for forestry. And I'm really proud of him. He graduated actually this last weekend. But he's going first forestry, and on top of that, these high school kids, you know, they're growing up in a different world, a technology world that has suppressed everything I've done when I was in high school, social media, etc. But the Youth in Forestry program, we got a lot of funding from our forestry program. It helped us buy tools and vests, etc., paint guns, to show these kids what forestry was. And I'm really glad that Joe Holford, you know, he got us that money. He got us the funding for that. And then it even goes above that. We got our forestry aides and our technicians, and we have an internal program called TIP. It's a technician improvement program. It's basically based on projects that we need to get complete. If they get them complete and get them done, and then we can submit their name for training. And it benefits them in the long run. I've had fellow colleagues that actually left forestry because they got a lot of good training, and now my colleague actually kind of supervises what I do in the field now. So he, you know, makes sure I'm doing my job. And before I was his boss, so now it's kind of, it's flipped now. And that's the end goal. We want to teach these kids that, well, not kids, these people, whoever you're working with, that there's expectations of your job, but you're also wanting to do more so you can exceed. This is my colleague, Miranda Salas. She was an AD. She had trouble getting hired through the tribe because she's a descendant. But she has a really good work ethic. I've worked with her on the hand crew. I've seen her work side by side with hot shots. I do calculations of weight per person, and I put just as much weight on her as I do any other of my guys. With that being said, it's really, you know, some of the younger people in this room that should be encouraging the kids, the teenagers, your cousins, whoever, to be involved in something productive. And if it's not forestry, push them to fish and wildlife, push them to range, push them to any other program that they have any interest in, because not doing it is a lot easier than doing it. And it's up to everybody to kind of encourage the younger generation that doesn't have faith in themselves, they have low confidence, etc. You know, kind of push them and let them know they're capable of doing more than they think they can. I just wanted to share a little bit of that, you know, because Colville does have a struggle with getting people in the forestry workforce. We move a lot of wood. We're always constantly moving. So we're held to a really high standard, and I just wanted to use Miranda as an example of, you know, reach out and, you know, make sure they know that they can do it and they can get a job and succeed in life.
All right, and with that, I think our time's up.
Are you raising your hand, Jim? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Hello. I wasn't going to say anything, but Fred Clark inspired me to say, make a couple of comments. My name is Fred Matt, so our Fred sticks together, and I'm from Salish Kootenai, Flathead country in northwestern Montana. But one of the greatest tools that I saw over the years that was really successful back in the day, I guess, the Montana and Wyoming Tribal Leaders Organization sponsored a summer program called ITYP, Intertribal Youth Practicum. And what high school age kid, when you tell them, you know, they can go out and in the woods camp for a week, co-ed, you know, meet some significant others, maybe, I don't know. But, you know, who won't resist that? And the reason why I mentioned Fred Clark is because we did this in combination with the Forest Service. Actually, the Forest Service would bring out like a fire camp and set up the tent in the cooking kitchen and the whole bit. And then the tribe, it wasn't just forestry, but it was it was other hydrology and other aspects of management out there in the forest. But to me, I saw that was really a successful program, and I don't know how many do that. But summer programs, I think you get those high school age kids out there. Like I said, who doesn't want to go camping? Who doesn't want to spend a week out in the woods instead of the mall? But anyway, I saw that was a really successful program, and it's kind of gone away in our country, but I think that's a great recruitment tool for getting those kids. And I think you need to get them before they're a senior, you know, because by the time they're a senior, I think they're pretty much dead set on where they're going to go. But anyway, that's just an idea. So thank you, Fred, for getting up and talking and inspiring me to share a few words as well.
Good afternoon. I'd like to say thank you to the panelists for stepping up and presenting this afternoon for us.
My name's Leon Ben. I'm the fire director for the Branch Wildland Fire out of Boise, enrolled tribal member for the San Carlos Apache Tribe. One thing that Dr. Allen, probably due to lack of time, is one of the things that NEU School of Forestry does too is the 401 program. And when I was in the Western Region's regional FMO there, we took advantage of that agreement that the NEU had with the Forest Service back in the last decade. And that was through IFPM when we had the 401 series as the path towards achieving, the roles of FMO, field specialist at the time, and still is for us in the Bureau today. Forest Service and BLM have steered away, they moved away to the 301 series, but BI we maintained with the 401 series. And so the School of Forestry's 401 program filled a niche for us in the region at the time. And our focus back then was to recruit the longtime forestry technicians within my region that we felt had the potential to get educated and to get the higher qualification on the red card side to move up in the ranks. And so we talk about recruitment and retention. To us, just like Cody said too, we had to grow our own, basically, grow our own FMOs, our own field specialists. So today we've seen the fruits of our labor 10, 11 years later. I'm gonna name a few folks off the top of my head right now. Marvin Dazen, our AFMO, Assistant FMO 401 series for Fort Apache Agency. Leander Reelbird, AFMO for the Western Regional Office. So just a few success stories. Alan Sinclair, Pima Agency, FMO, as well as Type 1 IC for the Southwest area. And so that's one thing that we're trying to do. Jim Dergalo, I'm hoping that we can convince you that we are, workforce succession development has been occurring. But this is not going to be all end all. It's just our little niche that we saw as an opportunity to fill. I'm in that age category now, 50 plus, so I'm looking at my next. I have been looking for and identifying folks that I'm mentoring to bring up behind me and to replace me someday. And so, and Kelly, she did 17 years at San Carlos with the tribe there. And after graduation, I only lasted 4 years with my own tribe there, San Carlos. So I want to say thank you too for I consider you from San Carlos, and I consider that's where you're from, and even though you're living in Portland now. So I just want to say that, there's stuff going on, workforce development. My branch, we've committed to developing a PD for a workforce development specialist, and definitely we'll be working to have that position, coordinate with ITC, colleges, universities, and also I think another thing too in this room that we can do, and what I heard earlier was, get in our faces, on campus, at the universities, at the colleges, and high schools. That's a way to recruit and then work with them to retain those folks. So and that's what they mentioned. I like to go eat pizza with the native students from School of Forestry when we have our advisory councils in October. So I like to do that with them and visit with them and talk with them and share stories of my time there, and not everything, but just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Jim again. Fred made me say that earlier, so you got to blame Fred and Matt. No, I really think that there's an opportunity. There's some leadership in the room that there may be an opportunity to commit to do something more. It seems like the need is greater than the action, and I know that there's a lot of tribes that are doing some very great things, and very proud of the young folks over here, and what they're doing, and each tribe has their own youth activities they're trying to engage, but it seems like the need out there is greater than the action that we're doing now. So maybe we just need to do more of the good things that are being done, more of the recruitment activities that are currently being done, share the successes that are already out there, replicate the great things that Leon started with the technician program, developing that 401 series in NAU, things like that. Do more good things for more people. And I'll be quiet now.